Look, I'm all for making the game of football safer as much as can reasonably be done. If it doesn't need to be as dangerous, then let's not have it be as dangerous. But when we are talking about football, it is still inherently a violent game. It is a very violent sport, and no matter how much you try to regulate, legislate, and or eliminate the dangers of professional football or just playing football in general, they're always going to be there. That hasn't changed in the 100+ years of the history of the game. But in recent years, we've heard about all this fancy research by scientists and researchers, doctors, talking about the long-term effects of concussions and repeated head trauma and the mini concussions and CTE and depression and all of this other crap. Alzheimer's coming out of it, ALS, any number of variety of maladies related to nervous system, joints, the brain, all of that. And it seems like in recent years, the media of the sports world has tried to present it in a way where the players are kind of pathetic and the fans should feel sorry for these former and retired players. To which I say, bullshit. I don't feel sorry for them whatsoever. That's ridiculous, and I resent the sports media trying to get me to feel sorry about them. And they know that's what they're trying to do. Look, I always come back to this. My grandmother, Lord rest her soul, when she was alive, in her 60s, used to tell me, Jeffrey, I don't think you should play football. It is too dangerous. You could get really hurt, and it could really mess up your head forever. Now, that was my grandmother, an immigrant from Germany, a survivor of World War II Germany, telling me in her 60s, in the 90s, that I shouldn't play football because it was too dangerous, echoing things my mom and my dad said to me. These are not people that were doctors, researchers, scientists, none of that. Bonnie Sue wasn't, Peter Arnold most certainly wasn't, and God bless that woman Maria, she wasn't either. If they were smart enough to understand basic common sense of, holy crap, this is an incredibly violent game, which I happen to love then and I still love now, bad things could happen and there could potentially be long-term consequences. It is like when I made the decision, since I couldn't play a sport like football because nobody would ever sign off on it for me, I decided to become a runner because I had a little bit of talent in that space back in those days. I knew that repeated trauma, running on pavement all the time, could potentially lead to issues long-term in my later life with my knees, ankles, hips, back, neck, all of that. And guess what? It has. And I don't regret it for a second. I wouldn't change anything about that decision. I ultimately knew, because of common sense, just saying, oh my God, you're going to run miles upon miles upon miles every day, every week for freaking years, for a decade, 2 decades. I wonder what that could potentially do to your body. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this crap out. My back hurts me almost all the time. Why? I firmly believe because of all the years that I ran. But again, I wouldn't change that. I wouldn't go back and change anything about it, my decision making. I'd do it all again. I'm not going to sit there and bitch and moan and cry about woe is me. Somebody should have told me about the potential consequences of being a distance runner all those freaking years and what it could do long term to your joints and your tendons and your cartilage and your damn body. Because I had just a little bit of common sense to know better. This is like sitting there and getting mad at the tobacco companies because they're telling you back in the day that smoking wasn't dangerous, wasn't going to cause cancer, when everybody knew goddamn good and well that it did. You're trusting the entity that has a vested stake in profiting off of this and basing your decision off of whether or not you're going to smoke. You're an idiot if you do that. And for these retired former NFL players, it's the same thing. You're going to be mad because the team doctors told you that you weren't going to get that punch-drunk boxer type of syndrome, that it was okay to play with that concussion, just get some smelling salts and dust it off. You know what? If you were too stupid to realize that this could potentially have some long-term consequences, or you just knew it, and this is worse, knew it and allowed it to happen and didn't care, and now are turning around and bitching about it and want to go after blood and want to sit there and sue the pants off of the NFL, you're a piece of shit. That's it, period. Because, let's be honest, I look at a guy like Jim Brown, who's in his 80s now. Sure, he doesn't move around as well as he once did. He's also in his freaking 80s. Again, I emphasize his freaking 80s. And even with the 9 years of playing in the NFL, he was still physically able to beat women in his 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. O.J. Simpson was able in his late 40s to allegedly kill 2 people, and then in his 50s, or excuse me, his 60s, go about setting up a robbery. The point I'm getting at here is, just because some people experience it doesn't mean every person does, and whether or not you do or you don't sit there and have a bunch of sour grapes because a decision you made 30 years ago came back to bite you in the head or in the freaking ass. That's bullshit. I'm a firm believer in this world of taking accountability for our decisions, choices, and actions, and looking at ourselves first and foremost when something is wrong. And for all these cowards who the real truth is, they're just pissed off they didn't get a bigger piece of the financial pie. And I understand that. I get that. But let's try to separate the issues here a little bit. You want more money. That's what this is all about, is a pathetic money grab because you weren't smart enough with your money or didn't do enough to accumulate enough money throughout your career or weren't good enough to stick around long enough in the league to have that type of career where you could make that type of money, or your timing was bad because you played in the 60s, 70s, and 80s before the money really exploded in the National Football League. Again, that's not the NFL's fault. That's not coach's fault. That's not the team doctor's fault. That's not the organization's fault, the league's fault. That's on you. Especially knowing that this was a violent game and there could be potential consequences and repercussions, especially when you would see previous generations players walking around and acting like they couldn't move to save their damn life. There should have been an association there that someday that could freaking be me. And you know what there was, and you didn't care then. Why the fuck do you care now? It's because now it's time to pay the piper. It's time to live with the consequences of your choices, and now you don't like it. I remember Randy Cross arguing with me on Twitter, I think it was about a year ago, talking about how team doctors lied to him and about the punch-drunk boxer thing. Again, if you thought as an offensive lineman that there wasn't a real chance of danger of sitting there and having all this repeated head trauma from playing the offensive line position, then you know what? All the concussions in the world didn't impact your brain because you were already a fucking idiot to begin with. Like you saw all these boxers over the years. Oh my God, these guys get hit repeatedly in the head, padded gloves my ass. Do you think there could be some potential consequences and repercussions for their choice of vocation, for their choice of sport, and being in boxing from the time they're a kid for 10, 20, 30, 40 frickin' years? Common sense indicates if you get repeatedly hit in the head for an extended period of time, you could have some issues down the road. You don't need a doctor, or a scientist, or a researcher to tell you that. And if you do, again, the sport that you play has no impact on your lack of intelligence. You are already a fucking moron. And I, again, feel no sympathy for these players whatsoever. Because the truth is, all it is a fucking money grab. All they want is to get some justice for themselves for putting their bodies on the line for 100th of what the guys make now. And they're angry and bitter and butthurt about it. And now they didn't realize when they were younger that, holy shit, all of these things come at an expense. And the medical bills are going to be astronomical. And I'm going to have struggles just to live a satisfying standard of life day to day. Like I recently saw an article about Jim Plunkett. Talk about how his life is hell and he's taking 13 pills a day. Well, you know what? That sucks, but I don't feel sorry for him. He got a chance to play in the NFL for a decade and a half. He made that choice to play in the NFL. Unfortunately, those are the risks that you took, and now you're paying the piper. So, sports fans, please don't feel sorry for these guys because you shouldn't. They made their choices, they made their decisions, And they shouldn't have needed anybody to tell them about the risks or dangers because they're clearly evident to everybody. Again, if my grandmother back in the 90s, in her 60s, an immigrant from Germany, could sit there and tell me that football is a dangerous game, then their parents probably did too, and they still played it anyways. I mean, it's that simple. And the media and the way that they present these stories, trying to elicit guilt out of the fans and sympathy from the fans. I'm not falling for that bullshit. If anything, you only make me resent those retired players more because I'm tired of hearing them whining and bitching and complaining about the ailments, the injuries, the maladies that came from playing a sport that they swore by for all those years of their life. That's not something to empathize with or sympathize with. It's not. It just isn't. Football is a dangerous game. And you know those risks even as a kid when you start playing that sport. So don't be surprised when it bites you in the ass when you get older. And don't come crying to anybody about how bad your life is and how you deserve sympathy, because you're sure as hell not getting any from me.